Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us. It's another Friday, and as usual on Friday, we get to talk about issues concerning the big stories across the world, especially on the African continent. But today, we're deciding to take a different turn and look at issues in the United States of America. And then we know that the US had been making the headlines lately because of what's happening in Haiti, or rather at the border of the US, where citizens of Haiti have been in pictures, videos, treated badly. In fact, a lot of people have termed it as inhumane, and this is called for protest. A lot of people are speaking up against the government and are calling for an end to the repatriation of Haitians back to their country. Now, there are headlines that have said that they were returned to their countries against their will. But I'm not going to be analyzing this issue alone. I have guests who are joining me who know better and have a clearer picture of what's happening at the Texas border with the migrants from Haiti. The big question everyone is asking is, why are so many Haitians migrating towards the United States? My name is Mary Anna Code. I'm reporting live from Lagos, Nigeria. My first guest is she is a professor, and she is also a global PR leader. And she is joining us from the United States. I'm talking about Professor Claudine Moore. It's good to have you join us, Professor.
Good to be here. Thank you so much. Nice to see you again. Always a pleasure to see you.
Great. And Ndu is not great. Ndu is not a stranger because Brian has been with us before to talk about the Haiti issue. Brian Lunga is the political editor for the Southern African Times. Thank you very much, Brian, for joining us.
Thank you ever so much, Marianne, for having me. And hello, Professor.
Hi, Brian.
So I'm going to start with you, Brian. It's interesting because a lot of people are talking about this situation in the United States, and many people probably wouldn't have even known that this was happening if the videos and that very triggering picture of a police officer or a border control officer, on a horse with a whip, and that young man from Haiti, almost falling into the water, surfaced online. A lot of people probably wouldn't have known, exactly what was happening in Texas. But the first question, like I asked, is why are we having so many Haitians at the border in Texas and at the border in Mexico?
Thank you very much, Marianne. I think the last time we spoke about the resilience and the strength of the Haitian people, how they've gone through so many or challenging issues throughout the history. And we are no stranger to what happened in 2010, where they had natural disasters and, of course, the instability that they had politically, which affected the economy as well. And at that time, a lot of Haitians did leave Haiti, and they found themselves working in Brazil during the preparations for the World Cup. They were there during construction. Some of them then moved on to Chile and worked there for a bit, where again opportunities in construction were available. But as the years have gone on, one thing that has become apparent is that most of the countries across South America are tightening up their borders. They are tightening up their immigration rules, and as such, it has forced a migration and eventually has led them to where they are today, Del Rio in Texas. It's also worth mentioning that although the Haitians are probably the largest in number under the bridge, as they've termed it now, there are also other nationalities there that have migrated from South America trying to gain entry into the United States.
Professor Moore, I want to bring you on because this is an American issue because Black people are involved and we see a lot of people speaking up about it. I first saw your reactions on social media, and then I saw celebrities like Chris Brown, and then the news channels start carrying it. Now, there are people who are criticizing the fact that it was not reported on a level that it should have been reported if it were to be another issue. But then several people are pointing to it as a case of racism. Why is that?
Yeah, so several people are looking at it as a case of racism because we have seen many nationalities of um, uh, asylum seekers at the border, as Brian mentioned. But this is the first time that we're seeing so many en masse who are Black and of African descent, essentially. Caribbean people are of African descent. And it's the first time we're seeing, um, even though previously there's always been some Black asylum seekers with South American asylum seekers. South American people are Black and brown, okay? But this is the first time that we're seeing so many en masse from a specific country. And this is the first time we're seeing them treated so appallingly to the point they are being what appears to be whipped by men on horses, which triggers a lot of very bad, very despicable, and very disgusting memories of America's very sordid history of slavery. Did you want me to continue, Mimi, or have you gone?
I'm so sorry. We you froze for a bit, so I was trying to figure out what happened. But then now also see that we've gotten reactions from the U.S. Congress. We've seen the Vice President also speak on this to what happened at the border, especially with the whips and the horses, the picture. I mean, I've seen so many people analyze the photographs that have surfaced online, and it really makes me wonder why this would have happened in the first place. Now, we cannot also leave out the fact that these people, most of them have been allowed into the US, I think 1,000 of them, but there are also a group of them that still have to be turned back. We see that on the Mexican border, they get supplies, they get what they need, and then they still go across to the other side, even though they know that they cannot get in. But looking at the issue of migration under the Biden administration. I remember the picture that surfaced online under the Trump administration of a baby that obviously died at sea on the Mediterranean while they were trying to get into the US. And this was a great issue the whole of 2020, 2019, 2020. We saw mass movements from Africa down to Europe and America, and the Trump administration got a lot of stick for that, and people really had hope that the Biden administration would not go in that direction, but we're seeing that happen as we speak. I
Well,
don't know
exactly.
because we're watching the news
If I
out
could
here
say,
in Africa, but is the Biden administration getting fire where they are right now?
yes, they are, and as they should be, because when we saw the atrocious treatment of the migrants under the Trump administration, the Democrats, sorry, were very vocal and very robust in their response and their condemnation of the policies under the Trump administration. And Biden's promise was a humane approach to migration. That was what his promise was when he was on the election trail and when he became president. His promise was a humane approach to immigration. And what we've seen instead, and I'm just looking at my notes here because I got some figures for you. What we've seen instead is that a Trump era policy, which is a public health rule called Title 42, that would, due to COVID, so that's why it became a public health rule. It was called Title 42, that they will expel migrants and deny the opportunity of asylum. And that was a Trump administration rule that has actually been used over 700,000 times under the Biden administration. It wasn't abolished, it has been continued. And don't quote me on this, but that figure of 700,000 times that policy has been used, the Biden administration has been in effect for what, 8 months? So that's how many times it's been used. So the promise of, quote unquote, a humane approach to immigration has not come to fruition. And what disgusts me the most is that had this happened under Trump's watch, the Democrats would have been very robust in their response. It's happened under Biden's response, and his press secretary, when she made her first comments on Monday, said, "Well, it looks horrific, but we need to look at context." She did say, in all fairness to her, that she can't imagine any context where this was okay. She did say that, but pictures don't lie. I know there's been some sort of talk about the Border Patrol officers. I think the head of their union or their organization said that they weren't whips, they were reins, but they were using reins. And the United States of America has a history of this. So it's very plausible for people to see this and think again that the pictures don't lie. Those are reins being used against Black people. Very reminiscent of what happened not too long ago in America's sordid history when it comes to race relations.
Well, joining us just now is Scott Lucas. Scott is an emeritus professor of international politics at the University of Birmingham. And Scott, thank you for joining us. I know you had an interview before now.
Hey, thank you so much. It's a real pleasure to join you and to get all your wisdom on this, because it is a hugely important, difficult, and fraught topic, most of all fraught for the migrants that are involved. I guess what I throw out to you is a little bit of background to this and get your all's reaction to it. And in no way in giving you this background am I justifying what's happened. You might notice over my shoulder here that there's a cross stitch on the wall for my daughter, which is from Hamilton. And you know what Hamilton says about migrants? Because I'm actually a migrant in the UK. I just happen to be a guy with a white face. And it's easier to be a migrant when you have a white face than it is if you have a black face or a brown one. But that said, here's the context to test this out. The first is that there's three things let me put to you that set this up. One is that the Biden administration inherited a broken system for migrants, and the Trump administration basically shattered it. This has been an issue for decades. You all know that. But when the Trump administration, it wasn't just a question that they took children away from parents, they pursued the separation policy, they threw people into detention centers, they denied the right to asylum. They simply stopped the whole system of putting people into shelters, putting people into centers across the United States. So you had the capacity, which was reduced to handle migrants. And then in January, as the Biden administration took off, migrants surged. You got to be honest here. A lot of migrants thought, look, Trump's gone, Biden's in. We may have a shot of getting into the United States. The system might be able to accept us. There are a lot of people who profit off of selling that line to migrants, even when the border's closed. And so what you had, for example, is whereas you were down to 16,000 migrants per month in April 2020, it was up to 200,000 in the month of July 2021, or what's called migrant encounters, that horrible euphemism. And then the specific case that we're talking about here is, this brings in the third factor. The Biden administration in July did something which needed to be done, and that is that Haitians who suffered from the earthquake, the devastating earthquake a few years ago in the country, were given temporary protected status in the United States to remain. So thousands of Haitians were able to come because of that. The Trump administration threatened to withdraw temporary protected status. The Biden administration in July said, no, we're not going to expel any of the Haitians that are already in the country. And that includes, by the way, the relatives of some of the migrants who have come recently. Said, we're not going to expel them. And so when Haitians heard this, a lot of them who haven't been in Haiti for years. They've been working in other parts of Central and South America. They thought the Biden administration is going to accept Haitians. Now, that isn't what was said. The Biden administration didn't say, we're accepting. They just said those who are here effectively can't be kicked out. And then you get 15,000 Haitians who wind up near Del Rio in Texas. And the Biden administration.
But I'm so sorry, Scott, but could this have been as a result of the fact that the Biden administration had promised that it was going to be humane towards dealing with the people?
Oh, yeah.
And that's why they thought that there was going to be some soft landing.
Yeah,
but
you
then
have that generic.
do we see that humaneness in how the people are being treated? Because I have seen people compare this to slavery.
Oh, look, they're not treated. What happened in Del Rio is not humane at all. I will want to add one other piece before I get really angry about this, and that is the Biden administration made the statement on the one side which said, all right, Haitians are protected if they're already here. But more broadly on migration, there's a key statement that you all might remember that Kamala Harris made a few months ago when she was touring in Central America. She was in Guatemala, which was, don't come here. Stay in your countries. We'll give some money to help your systems out, to help the economic system out. Don't come here. And from the Biden administration's point of view, and I don't agree with this, that was like, okay, well, we told you you're going to come here. And, Professor Moore is absolutely right that they used Title 42 just as a catch-all, which was meant to be a coronavirus measure, just to start expelling people. Now, what happened in Del Rio? Look, I come from a part of the United States, which is Alabama. So when you talk about the way blacks have been treated, that resonates. I was on the other side of that issue, quite obviously because of my skin color. But on top of that, there was a culture in the Trump years for Border Patrol, which was migrants are the enemy. Migrants are the enemy. Whatever you need to do, you can do it. Remember, at one point, Donald Trump said you could shoot migrants. If they threw stones at you, you could shoot migrants. So those border control guys, there's a culture which is almost of immunity from what we do against migrants because that's the way it was during the Trump years. And so some of those guys, especially the horse patrol, and you know what it means to have horses chasing you. You know what it means. It's much different than a border patrol officer on foot. And even if, whether or not they're using whips, I don't think they were swinging their reins, but they're doing so aggressively. And so here's a question for you. If that was not caught on video, and if we didn't have pictures, would the Biden administration have apologized for it? They got caught. They got caught out.
Very good question. Very good question. But just hold that thought. Let me go back to Brian and Professor Claudine. I can't find her right now, but Brian, it also begs the question because there are certain Africans who've also reacted and said, why can't we stay in our country? Why can't we make our countries better? Why do we always have to run to Europe or America to be treated so badly? And then this is the kind of, we get the short end of the stick. Why can't we stay in our countries? But then the guys in Haiti have real problems. Let's not forget. Their president was recently assassinated. They've also had a natural disaster of sorts. So of course the people are in between a rock and a hard place. But give me some of your thoughts on what some Africans are saying about Africans having to stay in Africa to build Africa, so we do not get the kind of treatments that we're getting from the West. And then Professor Claudine will come in.
I think in an ideal world, that will be what almost everybody wishes to do. No immigrant, especially coming from migrant, especially coming from tough conditions, goes through all the tough conditions of getting to where they're going just for the sake of it was just a trip I wanted to make. Most of those guys are coming from very tough conditions, go through very tough conditions. Some have been robbed. And I greatly think that in the case of Haiti, the United States of America owes a lot to Haiti. Because for what the USA is today, Haiti was very much involved, especially when you go back to the Civil War. Haiti was very instrumental in the American Civil War. So when we talk about Haitian migration to the USA, it didn't begin a few days ago. This goes back way into the Civil War. You can trace it as far back as that. At least 500 to 1,000 children were sent to help with the American cause when they were fighting from the English. And some of them as young as 10, 12, quite easily. So I personally think in this case, a lot of instability has been caused in Haiti based on one of the biggest things they did, which is the first country to free themselves from a colonial power. And with that happening, France was desperate to win that war. And in trying to win that war, they sold off a lot of their land that was in the USA. Haiti pumped in a lot of money as well in the process. Billions and billions of today's money has been extracted from Haiti to help the American cause. And I think just for that alone, a lot of help and assistance. There's so many other factors involved, even up to today, where a hand and element of America today still is involved in Haiti. And I think they owe a lot to the Haitian population. And the least the Haitian people deserve is a means-tested process as to entry into the United States. That is the list that they deserve, where there is a program of at least screening, asylum screening of some sort that is humane and decent. And then that way, if someone is eligible, they can stay. If they're not eligible, they can therefore be flown back to either Haiti or country of choice if that's the next step. But I think the very least they deserve some sort of humane treatment. Now, we even go back to the 80s, we go back to the early 90s. Haitian people were not treated in a very nice manner. Some of them were even sent to Guantanamo Bay. So this is not a new phenomenon of Haitians being treated so aggressively by the United States. And in that treatment, they've also been instrumental to what USA
Claudine,
is.
I'm so sorry to cut in. Well, Professor Claudine, I want to, again, the reason why I have you here is because you have a strong voice. You are a communicator, or the key things that we tell. And one of the most we see in this, all of that's playing out is that there was not enough communication of sorts taken. We probably wouldn't be having this conversation. We would not be giving any apologies whatsoever. But then looking at the Black world, and I'm talking about whether it's the Caribbeans, whether it's Africa, I mean, we know we have our problems. We know that we have the struggles that we have. But just as he has said, there are things that the United States owe Haiti. But then does the US owe Haiti open borders to have so many people come into the country in those numbers? And you see the conditions, they have to cross, through Mexico to Texas border. I mean, they're very dangerous circumstances. Could these people have at least spared themselves? Is it even safe to be there?
Yes, so the internet was a little bit unstable there, so you were cutting in and out just a little bit, but I managed to hear the lion's share of what you were saying, so that's okay. So I just want to, before I answer your question, I just want to mention something that Professor Lucas, nice to meet you, Professor Lucas, that he mentioned. And that was, he was talking about the fact that, he's in the UK, I believe, and that he's from the US. So, it's very different being an immigrant when you have white skin. Well, the thing is, they don't call people with white skin immigrants. They're called expats. They're called expat. You're an expat when you come from Canada. You're an expat when you come from New Zealand, Australia. So you're an expat. You never get somebody who is white called an immigrant. And that's where I am a bit of a red herring for a lot of people, because I'm an immigrant in the UK where I was born and raised. My family come from the Caribbean. My family come from 2 different Caribbean islands, Barbados and Jamaica. And in the UK, I'm definitely an immigrant. And then I moved to the US. So when I moved to the US, it's like, oh, but she's British, so she's an expat. but her skin is black, so she's an immigrant, but she's British, so she's an expat. So I cause all kinds of confusion. So I want to just mention, because I think that's a key point that Professor Lucas said, is that white people are never considered immigrants. They're considered expats. Even in Africa, when you have people from France, Belgium, the UK going to live in Africa, Africans don't call them immigrants. Africans call them expats. So that's just a comment I want to make. And I can see Professor Lucas smiling, so he understands exactly what I'm talking about there. And just sort of going off what Brian mentioned, which was that America at the very least owes Haiti. America owes Black Americans a lot, and they don't really even afford Black Americans, generally speaking, en masse, much respect for what Black Americans and African Americans have done to build up the country. So to think that America is suddenly going to have this sort of aha moment where they're going to think that, well, we owe Haiti so much, let's do X, is not going to happen, because they owe African Americans a lot and they barely acknowledge that in their policies and even in their recollection of history that's taught around the country. In terms of, do they owe them open borders? This is where I'm going to make a statement that probably isn't a very popular opinion, but I think it's actually an important one to make. As I mentioned, I've been an immigrant twice, in two different countries, in the UK, and an immigrant, expat, whatever you want to call it, here in the US. My family, we have a tradition of applying. We go through the legal route to immigrate to another country. And so I don't agree with just having sort of like this porous open borders. I don't think it's advisable anywhere in the world for anybody to run into, just using sort of very colloquial terms, but to run into another country, just run across the border. I personally don't think that's what anybody should do. However, I understand the desperation that can cause that. And often the desperation that causes that is really Western foreign policy anyway. So it's this whole vicious circle. But I, for one, just because my personal experience as coming from an immigrant background, where you apply, there are legal processes to applying. And people don't like to talk about that because people don't, I think they just want to say, well, just run across the border and then we'll accept you and that's it. That can't be a policy. That can't just be, it just can't be open borders like that. There has to be a process. And I don't want to sound harsh by saying that. I'm just trying to sound practical, because if you just have open borders, that's just, how is that processed? How are people processed through the system? How does that even work? Just to say it's open, everyone can do. There is a way of going of applying to become a refugee. And I think that's an important thing to raise. It's not very popular for me to say that. I have lots of colleagues and friends who think it's very harsh for me to say that there's a way to apply, which is important, but I think it's important to mention. I'd love to hear what everybody else thinks about that. Open borders just isn't the answer.
Yeah, so, I'm gonna throw it around because I can see Scott nodding and I can see the look on the face of Brian. But then I just want to quickly bring something up, because I know that the guy who is leading the envoy, the special envoy to Haiti from the US, recently resigned because he felt bad about the Biden administration's handling of this issue. That diplomacy is very key in dealing with issues such as this, especially immigration issues. I mean, Mr. Lucas, that this is also an issue in the UK right now. Of course, Boris Johnson is having to deal with this because diplomacy applied in dealing with this thing. How does this make the US look, in terms of diplomacy, in terms of relations with not just the Haiti, but of course every Black country, on the face of the earth?
Well,
Who wants to go first?
I think you know the answer to that question. It doesn't make the U.S. look very good, but that's not a new thing. I mean, the contradiction between the inscription on the Statue of Liberty, what is it? Give me, you're tired, you're hungry, you're poor, you're wretched, and then the reception of people when they do come to the United States is notable. But uh, why does that come about? That contradiction, that tension. Claudine, I thought that was a great comment you made. Brian and Claudine both made great comments, but Claudine, I was agreeing with you fully about one point, which was that of the difficulty of open borders, because I think it is difficult for any country to have open borders. I think it's practically difficult. I think culturally, we have to be honest, it's difficult with that amount of change across the open borders. But I think what I would call for here is transparency and organization. And that is, it's important that you have a system which adheres to the international norms and rights that we've set out since 1945, including the rights of migrants and refugees, including the rights to claim asylum. And what you have seen in the last few years, to start off in the United States, especially in the Trump years, was an assault on that rule. It was just simply that you don't have the right to claim asylum. You don't have the right to have a system which will hear you out. Now, why I find that interesting in the current context of Biden, if I can put this all to you, is the latest that I got, because I wrote about it this morning for EA Worldview, was that on the one hand, you have several thousand Haitians who have been deported quickly to Haiti, some of them even though they haven't been in the country for years. So they're going back with nothing to go to. On the other hand, several thousand Haitians have been allowed to stay in the United States and to have hearings, and indeed have been flown to places like New York, Miami, and Boston, where you can find shelter or to stay with relatives. But it is not transparent or clear to me what the criteria was for those who were sent back to Haiti and those who were allowed to stay. Was it because they had a relative in the country? Was it because they had young children? Was it because Haiti wouldn't take them back? So that lack of transparency is a huge question. And it will be an ongoing question, not just for Haitians, but for all migrants. What are the rules that we're playing by here in the United States? The second point, I guess, is what makes it so difficult is it's both race and it's also class. Because Claudine, the one exception I found in the UK about whites who are considered immigrants is if they come from Eastern Europe.
Yes. Yeah.
Right?
Absolutely.
If they come from Eastern Europe, because Eastern Europe is seen to be beneath Western Europe.
Yes.
In terms of where it goes. Now, why is that important in terms of Haiti? Do you remember a few years ago when Donald Trump made his, and I won't repeat the word he used,
yes,
but he used it about African countries.
Absolutely.
You remember that he also used it about Haiti?
Yes, he did.
And the thing is that Brian's absolutely right to talk about this rich history that Haiti has, this place that Haiti has within the United States. But I doubt many Americans know about Toussaint Louverture. They don't know about the 1803 revolution. They don't know about what that meant for the American Civil War. What they have is this image of Haiti as this not only black, but very, very poor country. So it's not just a race thing, it's a class thing. Why would you want poor black people coming into our country, taking our jobs, taking our welfare funds, and you know the tropes that they roll out. And I hate to say this, you all know this, and so does the Biden administration. And they are scared to death right now, too scared that if they set up a system which is fair, which is equitable, and they do it too quickly, they'll get backlash from all the Republicans, and especially the Trumpists, who are just looking for an excuse to say, you're not defending America. In other words, you're not defending white America, and thinking that that's a vote winner.
And so you think that this is more political than, I mean, everything is obviously political, but do you think that this is more about votes and not really about policies and diplomacy?
I'll add one other thing that's really key here. The Biden administration, and I support the Biden administration, some of the things it's doing, but it's fixated on getting through the infrastructure bill, on getting through the budget for social policies, which would be historic. I mean, 3.5 trillion would be huge in so many ways. But it is so fixated on getting infrastructure and the budget and on dealing with coronavirus that it will sacrifice other parts of the agenda. So just what we had earlier this week is that the Senate parliamentarian has said that they cannot put in an immigration measure into the $3.5 trillion budget, and the Biden administration won't fight that. They'll have to accept it. So immigration gets relegated as a general issue. And then when you have a specific case like the Haitians come up, the idea that they might be seen as being soft on immigrants and therefore risk losing their infrastructure bill, losing their budget, that's the political calculation they make.
Absolutely. I'd like to just add to what Professor Lucas said, because in addition to what he said, another layer on that is that it's a well-documented fact that the Democrats, year in, year out, the Black vote is incredibly important to them, for them to gain power and to stay in power. The NAACP and other Black activist groups are even I can't remember her name, but Maxine Walters has come out and she's made a comment that she's very unhappy with the Biden administration. African Americans, Black people living in America. So whilst, like I said, I was born and raised in the UK, but I live in the America. So I don't consider myself African American because I'm not American. I consider myself a Black American, a Black British American, because I do live here. And I do have an American passport. I'm a dual citizen. But the reason I say all of that is because the Biden administration has to be very careful here, because the Black voters are watching them. And Black voters are seeing how they're treating other Black people. The Black vote will continue to be incredibly important to the Democrats, especially with voter suppression taking place in key states across the country. So they are being seen as there's a natural phrase going around social media that refers to Joe Biden as, rightly or wrongly, whether you agree with this or not is irrelevant, but it's being said. There's a phrase he's called Jim Crow Joe, is how he's referred to on social media, in some courts of social media, in some conversations. And the reason is because it's to a lot of Black people in America, this is looking like, from a layman's perspective, just looking at the optics and on a very sort of surface level, you've got other immigrant groups who are non-Black being treated less violently than these Black immigrants are being treated. Now, there are lots of layers to that, and I know it's not as cut and dry as that, but that's what the average person is seeing. So it's looking like, when you're looking at brown, quote unquote, immigrants from South America, they are treated one way. And I'm not saying they were treated well, because they were treated in an appalling fashion. We've all seen those children and families in cages. But then when it comes to the Black migrants, the whips or the reins and the horses come out with images that are reminiscent of North Carolina in 18th century, in the 1845. And just those optics.
Look, I'm sorry, Professor. I was listening to LBC today, and Nick Ferrari made a reference to the pictures that, for a second, he thought it was a scene from the 12 years of a slave, because he's never seen anything like that, in the 21st century. And for him, that's the picture or the messaging that, he was getting from what was happening at the Texas border. So I totally agree with you on that, in that regard.
Yeah, I mean, people are not going to take the time. The average voter is not going to take the time to look into the history. They're going to look at the optics. Everybody likes their little nugget of news. They're going to look at the optics. They're going to look at the top line perception of the issue. And the top line perception is that white or politically white and brown immigrants are treated differently to Black immigrants.
Well, for those who are just joining us, we are live on HAPS TV, and we are talking about the issue at the Texas border in the United States, and of course, Haitians migrating to the US. We also know that the border of Mexico is also trying to deport some of these Haitians. But the pictures that surfaced online, the videos that surfaced online, has packed protests and reactions from every part of the world. And my guest, Professor Claudine Moore, is a global PR leader and a commentator. Scott Lucas is a professor, he's a journalist, he's an analyst, he's a political journalist and analyst. Brian Lunga is the political editor for the Southern African Times, and they're all here to, chime in on this particular conversation. But before we go back to our analysts, let me just go through the messages because people are sending us messages and we would like to react to them. Ernest Steele here
Somebody
says,
has asked me to comment about Priti Patel, but I
yes,
think that's
yes,
Perry Pilot or Pilot. Hi, Perry. I can't,
yeah,
I can't really speak to that too much. My, like I said, I live in the US now. So Priti Patel, who did happen to go to my actually happened to go to my high school. We went to the same high school together. But I can't, in terms of being detailed about her immigration policy, I can't really speak to that. But I just did want Perry to know that I acknowledged his question. But I'm probably not the best
yes.
person well versed to answer that right now. I think Professor
maybe
Scott
maybe
and
maybe
Brian,
Scott can
yeah,
help us. Yes,
yeah,
because
absolutely.
I also follow keenly the news and stories coming from the UK, and pretty seems to be on the lips of a lot of people in terms of her immigration policies. So Scott, we'll let you answer that, and then we'll
Sure.
go to other questions. Can you go ahead,
Yeah.
please?
And first, just a quick thank you. This has been such a great discussion, and an apology that I've got to switch back to the U.S. and India in about 10 minutes. So I'll be cutting out of here and letting you keep bringing the folks in and spreading the word. I'm going to start with Priti Patel, and then I'm going to double back to the United States and see what y'all think about this. And that is Priti Patel, who is the UK Home Secretary, who's an extremely ambitious politician who has been aided in that ambition because I have to be honest with you, there's a form of, in this case, privilege of color. The Conservative Party in the UK hasn't had that many politicians of color until recently. So the idea that you have a politician of color and that a politician who is a woman to be the standard bearer for their policies, it's like jackpot, because Priti Patel, being very ambitious, is quite happy to pursue the most damaging of anti-immigration approaches, both in policy and in rhetoric. And for those of you who do not know, she is now at the point where she has proposed that migrants would be processed or be removed to the South Pacific, to Ascension Island, which is thousands of miles from here. It was actually last in the news in 1982 during the Falklands War. The civil servant said, no, you can't do that. She has proposed recently intercepting boats of migrants from France in the Channel and then forcing them to turn back around, even though they may not be seaworthy, and it increases the risk to the migrants. And she was told, again, thank goodness, by civil servants and by the French, you can't do that. That's not legal under international humanitarian law, and it is dangerous. She doesn't care. She doesn't care because even if the proposals don't get accepted, she gets the headlines. And the headlines here are that, and I'll see if Claudine agrees, we're in, I don't even consider it a UK culture, it's an English culture, which is very, very badly damaged because of a combination of a complex which includes color, it includes immigration, but it includes a perceived loss of power. They want to be the empire again, which is why they separated from Europe. So Priti is like the new face for an old mindset, if that makes sense. Why do I bring it back to the States? All right, so Priti is of an Indian heritage, so is Kamala Harris. I mean, her mother is Indian. Her father is, I believe, from Jamaica, if I remember correctly. Donald Harris. She's the first Black vice president. She's the first woman vice president. She's the first Asian American vice president. All right, time to step it up. She was given the immigration portfolio earlier this year, partly because of her background. That's why she went to Central America. That's why she has finally gone down to the border. Will Kamala Harris step up now and beyond the statement that what was inhumane, which is the Border Patrol on horseback chasing migrants, will she step it up now to make policy statements on immigration? That's what's needed. Because if she doesn't step it up to make policy statements, Joe Biden isn't going to do it. And if she doesn't step up and do it, then you have to look to the progressive wing of the Democratic Party. But you've got to look to the progressive wing of the Democratic Party with respect, doing it to try to reach out, which is to offer an alternative policy on all those issues we've talked about. That you can set the system back up. It doesn't necessarily mean open borders, but it means a fair system and it means a transparent system.
Well, Scott, thank you for your 2 cents on that. Let's quickly go back to some of the questions. I know that we're going to have to let Scott go back to his interviews, but let's just quickly look at some of the questions that are still coming in or the comments. Jen Bod on Twitter. Okay, I don't think that's a question. Ernest Hill here says these officers are from the Trump era. And his logic of racism, thinking, and others. So he's trying to say that these police officers, but I really don't know if you guys agree, because I mean, I don't think any police officer would be serving. I mean, governments come and go. Police officers are here to stay until they retire. So I don't know if that has anything to do with Trump.
No.
Okay.
Well, I don't know if Brian wants to say anything about that, about the perception of Border Patrol from outside, from what you've seen.
Yeah.
I think the problem we're having is the case that now we have a situation where the migrants are stuck between a rock and a hard place, essentially. On one point, the US Border Patrol is saying don't cross, as we saw in the horseback. And the other side, you've got the Mexican patrol as well, saying don't cross. So now they're confined into this space. And I think one thing we all agree on here is that open borders are not the way forward, and that's not the way we should go ahead. But what should be happening is a decent, humane treatment and a means-tested system that works for everybody. And again, I highlight back to, I love how we brought Priti Patel into this, and then essentially the comment on Nick Ferrari. If Nick is also appalled, believe me, it is appalling. With Priti Patel and the migrants crossing over the English Channel, she wanted to turn them back. And this is very similar to what the US Coast Guard did in the 80s with Haitian migrants again. Turning them at sea, sending them back to Haiti. And we all know some of the boats that most migrants use are not safe. I'm of the opinion that the policies and laws that are set that are very, I cannot put this in a very nice fashion. Policies and laws that are set that are very robust and strong on immigration, if they are at this point where we are at now and seeing human beings being treated this way, then essentially it is all about the current administration trying to relax those rules and retraining the Coast Guards, retraining the Border Patrols, retraining the police, women and men on how to tackle these issues. Because now we're at a point where people are being treated in a very insensitive manner. And if the current administration is to go on and win the election again and rely so much on the black vote that they rely on, they need to somehow dial back on some of the policies and procedures that were set during Trump era. The Remain in Mexico, for example, the Remain in Mexico policy that confines people in a very small section of Mexico and say, stay there as long as you can, and we will not process you as far as we're concerned here. Now, I still believe means-tested way is the way forward. If, for example, it's younger children, why should younger children be in a camp subjected to such inhumane treatment? There is absolutely no reason. But essentially, it's about dialing back on some of the policies that are seen as inhumane.
So because we're almost gradually, in fact, we have 5 more minutes to wrap things up. So Professor Claudine, Scott had to run off, so I'm going to bring everybody back in and let's do a quick wrap up, because most of the comments are just agreeing with what we've been saying all evening. Um, but somebody said something that actually got to me. I think it's okay.
They've
I think it was
sorry,
Professor
they've been
Moore.
disagreeing with what we've been saying. That's always
Some of them
interesting,
have disagreed.
which is
Yes,
great.
some people have
Which is
disagreed.
great.
Some and some people have agreed. But I noticed that 9 congressional Black caucus members met with domestic policy advisor Susan Rice, the director of public engagement, and former Congressman Cedric Richmond and Tina Flournoy. Uh, the Vice President Kamala Harris, the Chief of Staff, on Wednesday. All of these people had a meeting on Wednesday and retraced that they plan to respond to the actions by the Customs and Border Protection with congressional action. Now, so far, that seems to be the Congress's response because, of course, Black Twitter has been on fire. I mean, I never really see people like Chris Brown say anything when it comes to politics or immigration, but for the first time, I saw Chris Brown get into it. So obviously, people are really concerned. And so going forward, um, like I asked earlier on, in terms of diplomacy, foreign policies, is the US going to be reviewing? Do we see that happening anytime soon?
Is the US going to be? I didn't catch what you said. Is the
Reviewing its
US?
foreign policy, and of course the issue of border controls. Are they going to look for? Do you see the body language of the leadership going in that direction, where they might be reviewing it and how they're dealing with this Haiti issue? Because of
Well,
course we didn't. I didn't want us to talk about Afghanistan because there have been also comparisons
I was
as to
going to
how
mention
the
that too,
Afghans
but
have been
yeah.
treated compared to the Haitians.
Are they going to be reviewing their policy? Sure, they'll tell us they're reviewing their policy, but reviewing the policy and changing the policy or evolving the policy are two entirely different things. So will they be reviewing their policy? Sure, but we need to do more than that. It needs to be a change in policy. I mean, look, I don't have all the answers when it comes to what the policy should be. Like I said before, I don't believe that we can have, or any country can and should have, just open, porous borders. I firmly don't believe that. And I believe that as somebody who is an immigrant myself, an immigrant, like I said, in not one, but two different countries. So I quite strongly don't believe in that. I don't think that's the way. There has to be a process. There has to be, I think Brian mentioned a means test as such. And I think that exists. Okay. I think, we countries have to and should accept people who are fleeing disasters, violence, devastation in other countries. We're a global family. We're a global family. If I had somebody knocking at my front door right now and they needed help, I would open the door to them. Would I leave my front door wide open for everybody who needed help just to walk in? No. But if there's somebody at my door that needs help, I will assess the situation and I'll let them in. And I use that very rudimentary example just to say that, we're a global family and we have to have consideration and empathy and assist people in need. There should be a process around that. I think that what the Biden administration has to really look at and consider right now is that the Black world and Black America is looking at them right now. They are seeing at a very top line level that other immigrants who are non-Black are not treated in the same way.
Hmm.
And I think
Okay,
that's
well,
something that they're going to have to consider because they need the Black vote to continue winning elections.
and final words from Ndu, because we are out of time with just a minute before the top of the hour.
Yeah, I generally think that in change of foreign policy by the United States, whichever administration it is will be non-existent. We saw this even with Bill Clinton. He did not change his foreign policy that much. He did not change his domestic policy to Black Americans. In fact, some of them some of them were just reworded, but essentially kept exactly the same sort of line that was there before. So let's not hold our breath. But let's see what happens over the next few days. I think a lot of deportations will happen, and I'm sure some of the Haitians that are in America that have been there for a very long time are also holding their breath, thinking they might knock on their front door anytime soon as well. Um, but yeah, I think a lot of people will be deported over the next few days. And
Okay.
as for change in policy, not a chance.
Well, I want to thank Professor Claudine Moore. She's a global PR leader and a commentator. She's an associate professor at NYU. I also want to say thank you to Brian Lunga. Brian is a political editor with the Southern African Times. And I also want to say thank you to Professor Scott Lucas, who joined us earlier and had to run off to do some more interviews. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. This was a very great conversation. And I think that these are conversations we should continuously have, especially when it has to deal with humanitarian issues and how people are treated all over the world. Thank you so much for being part of the conversation.
Thank you for
Thank
the
you.
invitation, and nice to see you again, and nice to meet you, Brian.
Nice to meet you, Professor, and thank you ever so much. And
Thank
to everyone
you.
that's watched as always, thank you.
Thank
All
you.
right, for those who might be joining us now, unfortunately we have to go, but don't worry, you can watch a replay. This was live on Twitter, live on Facebook, and live on my YouTube. So you can go ahead and watch it again if you're here in Hap, so you can watch a replay on Twitter or on YouTube at Mary Ann Dukakon. Thanking you because I am reporting live from Lagos, Nigeria. I'll see you next week Friday with more stories. Good evening.